Chapter 1. Evidence and the importance of communicating results. Based on the scientific method, the last and final step is for the one experimenting to honestly report on the findings, to properly describe the data and the cold, hard facts. It must be shown and described precisely from step 1, the question, to the hypothesis, and finally to the conclusion that what was happening and being observed. What does the scientific method have anything to do with the account of Moses? Also, what does the story of Moses have anything to do with the field of quantum physics and our personal success and that which we desire? It is of utmost importance that we realize that it has everything to do with everything. Moses, a sort of scientist. Let's briefly consider a small part of what is described as a very powerful moment in Moses' life. I would strongly encourage you to stop reading in this point in time and go and read in the book of Exodus, specifically the 3rd and 4th chapter in their entirety. At this moment, hopefully you have read it. Either way, let's briefly state the circumstances in which Moses is approached by the God of the Hebrews. Moses had ran away from Egypt, leaving prestige and position because he had committed murder. An Egyptian guard had abused a Hebrew slave, and Moses felt the need to avenge the abused man. Moses had grown up under the protection of royalty while watching his nation of Israel being oppressed by the Egyptian. The situation had gotten the best of him and made him react to this one act of oppression. Thus, Moses ended up killing the Egyptian guard. Obviously, he fled as a criminal and murderer under Egyptian rulership and therefore avoided persecution. The morality of the situation will not be discussed, and it will be left up to the reader. Murder is obviously wrong. The facts are just being stated for posterity. From whom is this information coming from? Moses, the convicted felon, had fled to a region where he was taken by a man named Jethro, who lived in the land of Midian with his 7 daughters. There, Moses married one of Jethro's daughters and became a shepherd. After some 40 years, he went to Horeb, which is referred to as the mountain of the true God. There he was approached by Jehovah, the God of the Hebrews, through an angelic representative. This is the interesting part. Moses listened attentively to the command from God to go free the Hebrews from another powerful god, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. To the Hebrews and the Egyptians, it was obvious that Pharaoh's kingship was also supported by other more powerful gods than Pharaoh himself. Moses, in full honesty, asked this amazing question. Quote, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" Let's consider the importance of this question. Here is a convicted felon, an old man, a lowly shepherd in the land of Midian, who had ran away to avoid conviction from that most powerful nation of that known world. Also, according to God, who is denoting to the fact that his so-called chosen people are enslaved under another God, is promising to deliver them from slavery. Certainly, Moses, confident in his God and in himself, was at an all-time low. This is incredibly relevant to our present day. Consider that we live in the information age. We are constantly bombarded with information that promises success and prosperity of all types. The ultimate advice on relationships comes from so-called experts in the fields of psychology, psychiatry, and medicine, as well as life coaches, and etc. The ultimate advice on how to make money comes from as many sources or more. Just Google how to be rich, how to be wealthy, how to be happy, how to be healthy, or how to, and you fill in the blank. We are then taken to hundreds of pages showing so-called reliable sources. Go to a library or a bookstore. There are massive and awe-inspiring amounts of books, magazines, reports, and different written or audio materials promising the same things. We are certainly not bashing anybody in particular, but it is important that we consider that getting exact information has become hard work, which takes enormous amount of time and effort. There are so many different opinions from so many different places about how to achieve success that we easily become confused without knowing who to listen to and whose advice we should take to heart. The question is, why should you, the reader, continue to read this book? And why should you even consider finishing this book? Do I, the author, have the evidence and the physical manifestation in my physical world? And do I have the results as suggested by the scientific method? In essence, do I have what you want? Do I experience what you want to experience? These are really important questions. Think about it. Every day, we are fed information and given advice and opinions by virtually everybody, including our own uncontrolled, biased thoughts. We must ask the following questions from such sources. Do they all have the physical evidence for what they say is going to give us what we desire? This includes asking ourselves honestly, do I give advice when I don't personally have the evidence that what I'm saying works and gives results? Have I done it through the honest and proper experimentation of what it has been described as the truth about success from people who have done it? Do I give it to myself and others? Moses had it right. Who the heck was he to be taken on a task of that magnitude? I mean, really? A lowly shepherd taking away one of the most powerful economic forces under Pharaoh's control to his own detriment? Moses had every right to question God's decision of choosing him for such assignment. And God let him ask his questions and gave him the freedom of speech. So please question everything and everyone. This teaches us that since Moses questioned God's judgment, then how much more should we question every thought that comes out of people's mouths, whoever they are? Let's not suggest that we should be cynical and generally negative about information from others. There is plenty of instruction out there that we can get to get real-life results to improve our present circumstances. But are we aware enough to do our due diligence, do research, and ask questions tactfully with insight and discernment? If we want to learn how to cook, are we learning from a master chef or low-wage line cook at a restaurant? If we want to learn how to operate a business, are we learning from a business school or are we learning from someone who has a profitable business? In both scenarios, you can learn, but from whom in reality will you really learn the most and derive the most dividends? There is the saying that goes, quote, "Be careful you're not taking weight loss advice from a fat person." A proverb by King Solomon says, quote, "The one walking with the wise will become wise," end quote. Spiritual leader Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 33, quote, "Do not be misled. Bad associations spoil useful habits," end quote. Our parents always told us not to hang out with the wrong crowd because they were afraid we would turn out just like them. This is why through this book, it will be examined why and how quantum physics relates to the workings and mechanics of our brains. We will examine that it teaches us that it is almost impossible not to be affected by others' negative or positive influence. This is good because through reverse osmosis, we can become successful. This means then that by having positive people around each one of us, we can ultimately become just like them, successful. Aristotle Onassis, one of the richest men in the world, was quoted saying that if he ever became flat broke, he would just go and be in the presence of wealthy people, and doing that in itself would restore his wealth. By this point, we must readily admit that the advice is not only logical, reasonable, but also practical. We are also getting strong validation from people who are ultra successful by definition. Everyone who is quoted in this book has been or still is an authoritative and reliable source. There are people we may know in one way or another. And more importantly, we know there are people who have evidence in their lives, which proves that they know how to achieve successful results and not just know about, but also know by definition. Their information will be proven as timeless. Like the law of gravity, it always works. So in all honesty, if we were to break it down, I would suggest that the best way to go about getting information to be successful is by this quote by a New York Times bestseller. Quote, "Listen to people who have what you want and have been where you are. Those who have the physical manifestations that what they are saying works." End quote, by Kevin Trudeau. So please do not kill the messenger. But let's go back to the question. Do I, the author, have the evidence that you wish to see? The answer is maybe. Why maybe? I can say I have great measure of success in certain areas of my life, but not in others. I may suggest it is irrelevant and allow me to prove it to you, the reader, and explain why. First and foremost, I promise to quote and derive sources and material from people who have or have had ultra success. Second, it is all based on foundational knowledge from experts in the field of quantum physics acquired through the scientific method. Therefore, I am not pointing out to my success as it stands right now, but that of others through empirical evidence. Third, there is the thought that even though a person may be financially ultra successful, they may be miserable when it comes to their health or happiness or even their personal relationships. You could learn how to have a great golf game from Tiger Woods, but not necessarily how you can have tremendous success from his basketball skills. You will go to Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan for that training. I only wish to portray information objectively, as we should all consider. This is what the current understanding is by the most authoritative sources thus far. So I would suggest that you continue reading and examine this book as a condensed form of about 20 years of research and personal study. Moses uses the scientific method to observe facts. Going back to Moses, we should thank Moses for having the guts to be honest in front of God. Jehovah acknowledged Moses' apprehension and dignified him with an answer by assuring Moses that he would be with him. Moses had trust that God was powerful, but was not sure if God was powerful enough to do what he said. Thus he asked, "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your ancestors has sent me to you,' and they say to me, 'What is his name?' What should I say to them?" Wow, another powerful question that is relevant to our day. Now Moses was asking for direct evidence and assurance in connection to the thoughts he was supposed to convey to the Hebrew slaves in Egypt so that they would have confidence in their so-called messenger from God. Thus far, Moses was asking for confident and conclusive observations to help the slaves comprehend why his promise had any validity, when seemingly there was none. Moses' observation of the physical manifestations as shown by the allowance of their oppression by the Egyptians to continue for hundreds of years obviously show the opposite. Moses' courage to present these questions to God was very honest and candid. He should be applauded. This is also a powerful lesson for us. We have acknowledged thus far that there are people who may come to us as messengers from others who claim to have the evidence to teach us how to be successful. I may suggest that as the author of this book, I fall in this category. But we should learn from Moses' honesty again. He did not want to just run off excitedly telling people a sensational report about God right away. He demonstrated this when he asked another question. He asked, Quote, "But suppose they do not believe me, and they do not listen to my voice, for they will say, Jehovah did not appear to you." Moses deserves an outstanding ovation at this point. Still sticking to his guns, he asked the money question. Quote, "What evidence do you have that I can show them to prove without question your power and the authority that you claim?" Was he not in essence asking for empirical evidence as the scientific method demands? Thus, we can acknowledge that it could happen. We may learn from people who claim to be messengers and truthfully have real life information that will positively have an impact on our personal lives. But it is important that we know for sure that they, the messengers, have evidence from the authoritative sources they claim to represent. This is where our due diligence and powers of discernment must come into place and kick in like the military training. Our lives, our livelihood, our success, and the success of those whom we love depend on it. It is a matter of life and death. I'm not saying this as hyperbole, but in a literal sense. People are dying prematurely every day because of the dissemination of wrong information to the masses. This point will absolutely, categorically be proven with scientific data as one of the main reasons we get sick and die. At this moment, we may be thinking of times when we may have failed to heed this kind of advice in the past. Maybe we are still paying the consequences of such wrong decisions. I know I am. So what physical manifestation did God provide that will help his messenger draw comfort and confidence in his God and himself to successfully accomplish what he was mandated to do? What physical manifestation did God provide that would convince the Hebrew slaves that their God was stronger than that of the Egyptian gods? What evidence will he show them that will prove that their God will accomplish what he promised? And what physical manifestations did God provide for Moses so that the Egyptians would readily see and know that even though the Egyptians had the Hebrews under their command, they would come to the point of having no choice but to let the Hebrews go without resistance, thus acknowledging Jehovah's power as greater than that of their gods. These are questions that are also relevant to our own personal circumstances. Take money, for example. Let's suppose a person makes $5,000 a month. He also desires to make a lot more. Then he meets 3 people who make more than him. The first one makes $20,000 a month. The second makes $100,000 a month. The third and final mentor makes $1 million a month. The person does his due diligence, takes responsibility, and learns from all 3. He finds that they do indeed acquire such incomes every month because he saw various bank statements, check references, and examined their lifestyles that show that they do indeed have the evidence of their financial success. We know for a fact that since they make more money than he does, the instruction that he will get from them will be of utmost relevance and value to him. But the one he's most likely to get the most benefit from is the one who makes $1 million a month. We could debate it, but the fact is that the financial records prove that he takes in $1 million a month. Through the scientific method and the powers of observation, this is a truth and fact, plain and simple. Moses was told by Jehovah to throw his rod on the floor, and as he did, the rod turned into a snake. The account tells us that Moses kept fleeing from it, but God assured him and commanded him to grab it. When Moses did, it turned back into a rod. So why was this significant? Without going into a long explanation, it was significant because the Egyptians worshipped reptiles, mainly the snake or cobra, as gods. This is known because Pharaoh wore what is called a uros, which represented his kingship and authority or the divinity of their gods. Later in the account, we read of a showdown between Moses' rod and snake and the rod snake produced by Pharaoh's magic practice and priests. Pharaoh's snake lost. The second physical manifestation was an act of healing. Moses was told by God to put his hand into his robe so that it became full of leprosy when he pulled it out. Then he put it back into his robe, and when he pulled his hand back out, it was completely healed. Both events are obvious physical manifestations for everyone to see. There could be no doubt or disbelief. More physical manifestations were given. This was also obviously emphasized by the 10 plagues and the parting of the Red Sea. To the majority of scientists who ridicule these stories, these quantum miracles sound more like allegories or myths. But the field of quantum physics alludes to the idea that these things are probable and plausible. This will be discussed thoroughly in the pages of this book, with practical application for immediate real-life results to help the reader improve and achieve desired results. In essence, this will help you get the physical manifestation in your world. Consider the following quote: "None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free." End quote. By Johann Wolfgang van Goethe. The real reason we do not have success. There's yet another lesson we can derive from Moses' conversation with God. Moses expressed apprehension in the form of self-doubt. He said, "Pardon me, Jehovah, but I have never been a fluent speaker, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant, for I am slow of speech and slow of tongue." At which point God offered training, emphasizing that it was him that could allow him to become better in his speaking ability. How would you feel if you were offered personal training from such authority? Yet Moses still shows self-doubt. "Pardon me, Jehovah, please send anyone whom you want to send." We all deal with various forms of self-doubt and fear. This may cause us to lose out on fantastic opportunities to create what we want. We may have beliefs about ourselves that we are not good enough. This may completely take away all desire to continue learning. So even though we may acquire powerful information and training from perfect, trustworthy, and reliable sources, we still will not do anything and would rather hide than experience something better. Our fears many times will overpower our own desires. We may want something and know exactly how to get it, but we will come up with every possible excuse and cling to it like a life jacket anchored to the seafloor. We may also truly believe that we have real limitations, but through the field of quantum physics and other reliable sources, we will prove without question that they are truly just that, excuses based on fear. We will also show how fear is literally killing you and your loved ones. There is scientific evidence that this is true. But alas, have no fear. Through the pages of this book, we will learn how we can progressively overcome fear. Napoleon Hill has been quoted as saying, "Whatever the mind of man can conceive and bring itself to believe, it can achieve." His statement has tremendous weight, since he is known as a powerful and reliable source of information that creates real-life success. And it is no wonder, since he had personal mentorship from Andrew Carnegie, one of the biggest business tycoons of his time. It is estimated that Mr. Andrew Carnegie, toward the end of his life, accumulated a net worth of almost $300 billion calculated to today's market. It could almost be said that Napoleon Hill was Moses and Andrew Carnegie his God. Obviously, the previous statement is just to illustrate the importance of learning from people who themselves had a mentor, someone with more evidence than the immediate source. On a side note, to this day, I continue to meet people who are ultra successful who suggest I read Napoleon Hill's works, mainly Think and Grow Rich. As a real life example, the last person who told me to read and reread that specific book drives what it seemed to be a brand new Rolls Royce, or maybe it was a Bentley. Please really think about that idea. You will notice that certain common denominators begin to arise as you learn from people who have exponentially more success than the average person. We will examine with scientific background, research, in a later chapter why physical manifestations that we can see and touch are undeniable evidence of proper personal scientific experimentation. Tying it all together, we discussed that even though many of these stories found in the scriptures may not be widely accepted as true, there are strong moral lessons in them that we can apply for ourselves. We can examine these stories through the scientific method and test the results that are promised within the lessons. We may be surprised that, like expert scientists using the scientific method, we will experience and see real-life benefit. Our unbiased experimentation will propel us forward, as long as we do not prejudge without giving this process true justice. So, like Moses, let's dedicate our lives to realize exactly where we stand in relation to our current knowledge, and maybe admit that since we have so much to learn, we may need mentorship. Looking for people who have powerful evidence that we can see and touch and experience with our full senses will let us know what we may be doing wrong if we are experiencing frustration with our goals. We do not attribute all success to material things, but to the ability for us to be able to see in real life the ability of people to create physical manifestations of their original thoughts. There is background research in the scientific arena that proves that this procedure is exactly what happens when people achieve goals and desires. It is precisely what is required to achieve success. And these concepts are what will be progressively be developed through the pages of this book. Now let's move on to revealing the scientific, empirical evidence of what we are talking about.